Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, I expect we'll hear about all kinds of opportunities associated with Green New Deal type policies. But our discussion really needs to include the costs of these policies, including the cost of lost American jobs, slower economic growth, increased energy costs, and the waste of billions of taxpayer dollars. Our discussion should also include the remarkable progress we've made in reducing carbon emissions, ironically enough, using fossil fuels. Let me explain. US carbon emissions have been falling for years. Not many other countries can say that, but we can. In 2019, US carbon emissions hit their lowest level since 1992 and their lowest per capita level since 1950. And the US led the world in reducing energy-related CO2 emissions. These declines were enabled by America's recent energy renaissance, made possible by technology and free markets. The natural gas boom, especially in places like Pennsylvania, have helped gas to significantly replace coal as the fuel for America's power plants. This has been the primary driver of the declines in carbon emissions. And we made this progress while creating jobs and lowering the cost of energy, thereby enhancing the standard of living of the American people, not going the other way. Despite all this, some of my colleagues seem determined to impose Green New Deal policies that will cost us jobs on a net basis and stifle the very developments that have allowed us to reduce emissions. Some describe this destruction caused by these policies as an opportunity to create new green energy jobs, but they fail to acknowledge the cost they're imposing in the lost jobs and higher energy prices. I'm reminded of the French economist Frédéric Bastiat's famous 1850s parable of the broken window. In the parable, someone breaks a shopkeeper's window, so he has to go out and hire a window maker to replace it. Some people think the broken window is a good thing because it created a job for the window maker. But Bastiat correctly points out the fallacy in this thinking. As he puts it, destruction is not profit. The shopkeeper had to spend money and time to replace his window. If the window had never been broken, that money and time could have gone to more productive uses, like hiring a worker to expand the shopkeeper's business. I feel like some of my colleagues sometimes seem to have forgotten this basic economic principle. And just as breaking a shopkeeper's window doesn't somehow create economic gain, neither does destroying traditional sources of energy and replacing it with so-called green energy create economic gain, for at least two reasons. One, it's not at all clear that the newly created green jobs are equivalent to and sufficient to replace the lost jobs. And secondly, the end result is that society pays more for energy, and that lowers our standard of living. And the consequences of this destruction are not just academic. The Biden administration has already imposed policies that today are destroying traditional energy jobs. For example, it terminated the construction of the Keystone Pipeline and banned new oil and gas leases on federal land. These actions alone will destroy tens of thousands of jobs for Americans. Today, we're going to hear from one of them, Neil Crabtree, a union welder who lost his job when Keystone was shut down. I'm also deeply concerned about the Biden administration's apparent efforts to coerce banks to reduce lending to fossil fuel energy companies. This week, all the Republicans on this committee sent a letter to John Kerry warning the administration not to abuse government power in this way. Mr. Kerry has said that the very purpose of President Biden's expected global warming executive order is to change the allocation of capital. In other words, to redirect capital from traditional energy companies to companies that are deemed to be sufficiently green. While this effort disturbingly resembles the Obama administration's notorious Operation Choke Point scandal, in which regulators attempted to coerce banks into denying services to legal, yet politically disfavored businesses. It's neither practical nor desirable to immediately try to cease fossil fuel production. Fossil fuels represent approximately 80% of US energy production and consumption, and abusing government power to try to achieve that objective will distort capital allocation, raise energy costs for consumers, and slow economic growth. Finally, Green New Deal job programs have a history of failure. Yet President Biden's infrastructure plan would double down on failed policies of the past. Consider one example. His plan would establish a $27 billion national climate bank to provide financing for so-called green investments. Well, we know that when the government substitutes its judgment for that of the market, It picks winners and losers based on political favoritism, not business fundamentals. Just look at the 2009 Obama-Biden spending bill. That bill included over $80 billion in spending, loan guarantees, and tax credits for green energy projects. And what were the results of this massive government program? There was a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse. Who can forget the infamous case of the solar panel company Solyndra? It went bankrupt and defaulted on a $535 million loan that had been guaranteed by, you guessed it, federal taxpayers. This is what happens when the government picks winners and losers based on political considerations. As one of today's witnesses, David Kreutzer, will testify, the Biden administration seems determined to repeat these mistakes of the past. Mr. Chairman, the fact is the climate is changing, and we should be having a vigorous debate about what to do about that. But that debate should honestly acknowledge that if we shift from low-cost, reliable fossil energy to high-cost energy like wind and solar, there are costs associated. Jobs will be destroyed and energy prices will go up. And we need to weigh those costs against the perceived potential benefits of the shift, and we should do so in an open, transparent, and accountable way, not through sweeping executive actions or backdoor pressure campaigns to coerce banks to implement the administration's preferred policies. Thank you.